Good morning. This is Mrs. Camp with American Government Quickies. Today we're going to take a look at the origins of American government and prelude to the Revolutionary War. If you are filling out a document, taking notes, you might want to pause this at times or slow it down because I do talk fairly quickly. And I talk off of the slides, but I don't read the slides. So let's start. Um, Origins. Okay, so Europeans came here. Woo! Columbus came here. Woo! Eventually, the British came here. The British settled in New England originally, and they came over, the colonists came over with an idea of limited government. They had this idea from the Magna Carta, which in 1215, a bunch of nobles were really unhappy, and so they forced King John, sign this document, recognize our rights. We want protection. You shouldn't be levying all these taxes because you know what? You're charging us an awful lot of money, and we want fair punishment. So these sorts of things influenced our colonists. Later, the Parliament, which is an elected body in England, now that England has a limited government, passed the English Bill of Rights. And the American colonists were familiar with this. They were affected by it. The American colonists believed that we should have a representative government. That means we should elect people who will make the laws, make the decisions, basically, a democracy. So at the time, let's see, late 1600s or 1700s, we've got something going on in Europe called the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment, lots of people were coming up with all these new ideas that contradicted a lot of the ideas that were going on. So when the king says, hey, God gave me this right, in England or in France, the Enlightenment philosopher says, no, I don't think so. No, we have this idea. We have all these ideas, and specifically the idea of the social contract. John Locke came up with the idea of the social contract, influenced by a bunch of other people. That's another video. However, the Enlightenment said, no, no divine right. And they came up with certain ideas that influenced our government, including the representative government, republicanism, constitutionalism, law, the idea of the rule of law, which means that everybody has to follow the law and it needs to be enforced equally. So going back to the colonies, each colony had its own government with a governor, a legislature, and a court system. The governor usually was appointed by the king, but not always. Sometimes they were appointed by or chosen by a company that founded the colony. And the legislature was elected at least a little bit, but we have the foundings and the beginnings of what we now have as a government. So, democracy, awesome! Working farmers who own land could have their views heard. Rather, his views heard. Hers? No. Slaves? No. Men who don't own land? Some places, but not everywhere. So, not everybody had the right to vote. Not everybody could go to local meetings and speak. But it's kind of a start. We're going to take a really long time to get past this. We're in fact going to take until the 1900s to get women the rights to vote. So let's take a look in America. I'm kind of jumping around here. The Pilgrims came, 1620, wrote the Mayflower Compact. What on earth is the Mayflower Compact? Basically set up the laws for the American colonies, or rather specifically Massachusetts Bay Colony. So take a moment, if you have a piece of paper, and you're going to pause this in just a second. I want you to write down a couple ideas. What laws do you think would be important? You're going somewhere new. Nobody's ever lived there. Well, that's not true. Europeans haven't lived there, and you think nobody's going to be there. But there are people there. So you're forming your own place. What laws do you need to make? Okay, I have a starter here. I think that important laws would be, okay, pause this and write down some ideas about laws. Okay, so the Mayflower Compact that they signed, choose your own rulers, leaders, make your own laws, and they went on and made laws that were consistent with their beliefs. So, 1636, Massachusetts Bay Colony was formed. The Puritans came over after the Pilgrims, and they founded it. And we had the first system of laws in the English colonies. So then other colonies started making their own charters, which is basically a constitution for a colony, creating legislatures, court systems. Okay, legislatures, hugely important. Um, they needed new laws. Something happens. We don't have a law to deal with this. Let's set out a law. How are people going to get land? Okay, well, let's decide that. We need some sort of town hall. Okay, let's decide that. Do we want to provide schools? No. Maybe eventually we'll put some governments in, and a long time from now we'll start public schools. But they had to make those decisions. So things are kind of peaceful. The colonies are getting along with Great Britain. Britain's getting along with the colonies. The colonies have their own politics, their own political institution. Britain is an entire ocean away. So sailing on ships, you think you can go to the king real quick and ask a question? So guess what? The governors had a lot of power. They represented the king. That means that the colonies really were pretty free of British influence a lot of the time. Okay, we call that salutary neglect, when Britain had colonies but didn't really get involved. And while that worked for a long time, it also set up some problems. So here's a couple videos. I'm going to post them with this when I post this on Google Classroom. If you are not one of my students seeing this on Google Classroom, take a look at these two meme stories. They're fantastic. You can also look at the American Revolution Oversimplified, the first one, and that covers this sort of information too. So this here is Boston Tea Party, a meme story. We've got the Boston Massacre, a meme story. Take some time and watch those because they're fantastic. So, okay, lots of stuff happened. It's covered in the meme story. But basically, Britain imposed taxes. Okay, well, they've taxed imports before, um, but not like this. Why did they tax? Because of two things. We had the French and Indian War and King George. So, the French and Indian War, they fought on behalf of the colonies. Came over, fought the French and the Native Americans to try to get some land, cost lots and lots of money. Britain's in lots and lots of debt. George comes in, says, "We're in debt, dude. Um, we need to pay this back." And guess who we fought for? We fought for the colonies. So we're going to charge them, thus taxes. So they have the sugar tax. Eventually, they have the Stamp Act, which means that colonists themselves, it was the first direct tax. People had to pay a tax on all legal documents, um, and documents that had to do with commercial purposes. And this included things like playing cards. Like, what? Playing cards? Yeah, playing cards, dice. They had to get the stamp, a stamp collector. They had to pay money for it. Fun? No. Happy? Really no. So lots of stuff happens. Lexington and Concord happens. There's a big fight in Massachusetts, and the British go in their rows, and the Americans go in their let's hide behind a tree and shoot, which is kind of an interesting setup. And you can see if you go on to the Revolutionary War, which I'm not going to today, and I'm not going to in this class, but you can actually look at the military strategies, and it's very interesting to see where they were the same and where they were different and how things changed over time. But let's jump back here. Basically, the British made the colonists very mad. The colonists retaliated. Look at the videos. So eventually, they have a Continental Congress. What does that mean? A bunch of people from all the colonies except one for the first Continental Congress came together, passed some acts. Then we had another one. Second, guess what? We wrote a letter. So real quick, First Continental Congress, as I said, one state didn't, or sorry, colony didn't come. That was Georgia. So people came. They said, okay, this is not working. What are we going to do? Um, and their original purpose was not to break away from Great Britain. It was not saying we want to be independent. It was saying we want to fix this problem. This is a big deal. So they decided on an embargo, which means that they would not buy anything from Britain. And that would include other British colonies. Britain didn't have the extent of British colonies that they did later in the 1800s, but they still had them. And then they decided, okay, uh, well, okay, embargo, not trading, boycotting any British goods. So those kind of go together. Sorry, I conflated them when I explained them. But they said, okay, well, if things don't change, let's meet next year. Did things change? Let's meet next year. Second Continental Congress. This is the one people know about. Between these two, I've mentioned Lexington and Concord. We call that it's a skirmish, but we call it the first battle of the Revolutionary War, and the shot is called the first shot heard around the world. If you want some commentary on that, John Green in Crash Course has some great stuff to say, and also explore why the American Revolution was not quite as revolutionary as we say. So, Second Continental Congress, 3 weeks after Lexington and Concord. Okay, lots of people. This time, every colony was represented. That Congress ended up being the government through the Revolutionary War. John Hancock was elected the president. Hancock is from Massachusetts, and if you've ever seen or scanned copy of the Declaration of Independence, Declaration of Independence, his is the really big signature on there. And if you ever visit Massachusetts, there's the huge John Hancock building and this John Hancock Tower and the smaller building. They're kind of neat to look at. So eventually they said, okay, this isn't working. This just isn't working. And we're fighting the British right now. Do we want to declare war? And so there's a big back and forth, back and forth. I know I keep referring you to other things, but the movie from the musical 1776, it's kind of hard to find, but it's worth watching. Especially there's a song that's hilarious. And then there's some real debate about what's going in this, and dealing especially with, there's a big scene about slavery and triangle trade, and South Carolina basically saying, hey, the North, you don't have slaves, but you're guilty of this too. So really, really good. Okay, so they said, the Congress said, okay, we're going to have a committee, a group of men who are going to write our Declaration of Independence. So they chose 5 men to do this. John Adams, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, who I will refer to in class now and forever as TJ, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. They said, we need one person to write it. So they said, Thomas, TJ, we want you to write it. So guess what? Thomas Jefferson wrote it. And we will have more pick up with the Declaration of Independence next time. This is Mrs. Camp's Government Quickie, looking at colonial government and getting to the Revolutionary War. Have a great day.